Hello, welcome to the Chris Ott channel, and this is Chris Ott. I am going to cover a book that I have been working on for a very long, about a third of my life. I'm going to cover it as a YouTube book, and the reason is that finishing the book is taking a long time because I'm always having new thoughts, and at this time, even though I have a manuscript, I am thinking of starting over the whole book. And the reason for that is that I have the talks that I've given about the subject here on YouTube, either with audience or without, have helped me so much to reflect on what I have to say that it's just always getting clearer. And that means when you're 400 pages into a manuscript, and you have greater clarity on where you want to start, it becomes tough to just, it's not just a small revision. So, but this is the final time that I think that I'm going to go through this verbally. And after this, I will give to my daughter the original manuscript, and I'll work on another, but I don't know if I'll finish it in my lifetime, but I'll do what I can, and whatever I leave, it will be left to my daughter, Megan. Copyright and responsibility for it and any future editing or changes that are made or publications. So, recently, I completed a second discussion of my ideas with Kerry McPherson in a series I call Talks with Kerry. And I felt very good about those. So I had a first series that was called Baba in the Future. That was 11 talks. And then Talks with Kerry was about 11 talks plus a couple supplemental videos that I did by myself to clarify some things in there. But I want to start over. And I think what I realized recently is that if I were to ask any of the three people that I know that know my idea the best, that I've talked to the most and the longest, and who have listened over the years, 20 years, and I asked them to summarize, what is my point? I thought, wow, I don't think they could say, because I don't think I've articulated it simply enough anywhere. And that concerned me because, it can look like I'm a guy who doesn't know what his point is, and that I'm just sort of rambling, and I don't have a point, and that's not the case. But there is some hesitancy by me to blurt it out too quickly, because it is prone to be completely misunderstood, because it sounds like things that have been said in the past. And so my fear has been, well, it'll be misunderstood, it'll be interpreted as what has been said in the past, and then people will dismiss it. In fact, what I have to say has never been said before, and is extremely important, and will be recognized as such at some time in the future. I understand why it won't be appreciated or understood in my lifetime. To give an example, it has to do with just the time that we live in and the nature of the concept and how it is in disparity with how people think at this time. You know, a lot of people think that the revolution called the Copernican revolution, from thinking of the Earth going around the sun, as opposed to the way it used to be thought, that the sun and all the stars all went around the Earth, that was proposed by Galileo, and that he was persecuted for it by the church. Actually, it had been considered for a long time, but it had been worked out systematically 100 years before Galileo. Galileo simply championed the idea, and he took the abuse. See, the guy who developed the idea was Copernicus, who was a Polish friar. And he published his idea about the movement of the stars and such. He published it posthumously after his death, because had it published after his death because he didn't want to have to deal with the pushback. And Galileo had the guts to deal with it. And 100 years have gone by, and maybe things were better. Science had progressed more. And also Galileo had the clout to do that. And he still ended up under house arrest for saying that. But, so a big idea is not recognized right away. Ideas that are recognized right away tend to actually not be big ideas. But I won't get into that. Okay. So I expect that this will be recognized in a few hundred years. It'll be recognized. And then somebody else will take it up, explain it, have some clout, and get it the recognition it deserves. And I also think that in several hundred years, I think the whole world is going to change because of this, that all society is going to change because of this one idea. This idea is so radical, you can hardly have any idea. Now, previously I've had different titles for this book. Most recently, the manuscript, which is 400 pages that I have here on the computer. The title is a problem of method. That was what it's called. It was dull, but it said, says largely how we approach the issue. We talk about problems in philosophy and science, and then we say, it's a problem of method. Let me show where the problem in method was and has been for all time. But I've also played around with other titles, and for this course, I'm going to use the title On Cause, meaning on the subject of causation. What causes things? Now, the problem when I speak is that people's minds drift. They don't find what I'm saying very interesting. They also find what I say very difficult. But what I'm saying is not difficult. I think that difficulty that people have is symptomatic of something else going on in our culture. And it's not with my words, because I don't use real big words or anything. And when I do, I say what the words mean. And I'm going to do that as we go. As a matter of fact, I have for a long time recognized that people don't know all the words that I use, and I have always made an effort to try to, as I go, define them. But in the book, I organize the book differently. I give a small introduction to with how the book itself is organized. The first thing I did was I laid out a problem in philosophy to capture the interest of people. I'm not going to do that this time. The second thing that I did was this? Okay, now we're going to approach this, but before we can, we're going to have the glossary right here. Now, it's not a long glossary, but it's about, 50 words or so. That a glossary at the beginning should be read, okay? And I'm going to go over the glossary. A glossary is important. It does two things. For words that people don't know at all, it introduces them, so they'll know them. And for the way it is with words, is words have many definitions. So we have to specify how it is defined when I'm talking consistently. And that often involves a definition that is no longer in general use, but was in philosophy a couple hundred years ago. And the reason that I use these archaic words and revitalize them is because there are no replacements for these words. They don't mean precisely the same thing. People were talking about what I'm talking about in the 18th century, but they did not talk about it in the 19th century. And words changed during that time, their meaning. So colloquial meanings of these words are not how I'm defining them. So we're going to have to be very careful to define them. So with no further ado, I'm going to begin that aspect of a glossary. Okay, first of all, there's the word cause. Now, everybody uses the word cause, The house burned down. What caused the fire? Well, Johnny had struck a match, or there was, so-and-so left some rags and kerosene, and there was a, spontaneous fire, or something like that. Something happened earlier that led to the event. We call that the thing that's responsible for it happening. But if somebody could really explain what we mean when something's the cause, it gets harder. Because in those cases, it's often just something that happened earlier. And that we know is something that very often earlier happens in those events. But how it causes it, we don't really know. For instance, if I leave rags in like paint stain, and then I cover it, and it doesn't get air, and I leave it overnight, it's going to burst into flames. So leaving the rags there caused it to burst into flames. But what made leaving it there become flame? Well, then it becomes more complicated, and you have to lay out a chemical narrative. Okay. So we're going to talk a lot about cause, and we're going to find out that cause has never been examined, well, at least not for a couple hundred years. It hasn't been examined as closely as we're going to. Okay. Now, causation is the word for the subject of causes. Okay. Now, ultimately, what we're going to be talking about and leading up to is we're going to describe the cause of everything. How did everything that we see around us get here? Most people are not very satisfied with the current explanation of how we got here, because it involves the Big Bang, and it involves Darwinian theory of evolution with natural selection. But all those things are accidental and random. They're based on total accidents, okay? And people are not satisfied. Most people, when they think about it, think getting something from nothing is a problem, okay? And that is what we are going to be getting at ultimately. So this whole thing is on cause, on causation. Now, I'll use the word consciousness and I'll use the word conscious, but not often, not a lot. I think that books these days use the word consciousness too much, and they use it all different ways. And so while people, perhaps there are people who nod with great approval that they get what the word means, they really don't, because all these books are using the word differently. Okay? So you have terms like quantum consciousness and cosmic consciousness and things like that. And here, all the word conscious means is actually, this is, it's its original meaning. It just means awake, okay? So if you're unconscious, you're not awake, you're not aware, okay? When you're in deep sleep, you're unconscious. The opposite of that is you're conscious, and that's all I ever mean. And I'll hardly ever use the word consciousness because it's a noun, and it sort of sounds like it's describing something, like where's my consciousness, you know? I don't think like that. So when we say conscious, we just mean awake, not unconscious, okay? It's the opposite of unconscious. Now, there's a very big word that I have found that people don't know anymore. To say anymore is a little unfair because I wasn't around when I think that perhaps smart people did know this word. You know, the English language isn't very old. Shakespeare introduced 3,000 words because you could do that then. That's how open the English language was at the time of Shakespeare. There were no dictionaries in the lifetime of Shakespeare. Today, things have gotten much more solidified. But I just say that because I can't say what people knew in English, you know, so long ago, because English is kind of new. But the word epistemology is the word I want to talk about. Every person I've ever asked what a word means has not known. I get a lot of, yeah, I know, and usually they say it's the root of words or something to do with words, and they have it confused with etymology. That's called etymology. It's not what we're talking about. We're using the word epistemology. And epistemology is a branch of thought that considers the question, what do we know and how do we know it? You know, we often feel like we know something, and we also often feel quite certain that we're right and we know. But very few people know that there's even a field that deals with the question, what does it take to actually know? People are very quick to say, well, I used logic, but they can't even say what they mean. It's actually, logic cannot determine whether something is true or false. That's a big subject, but it's in the book. That's true. It's very mysterious how you can know something for certain. It's a very big subject, and that's why they have a name for the subject, epistemology. So try to remember that word. Remember that they had this idea that Saddam Hussein, Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and everybody went along with it. And nobody even asked, well, how do we know? You know, because nobody even knows there's such a subject, that there is even such a concern. It's just, I think it's symptomatic of something in our time that people don't even know the word epistemology, let alone what it means. And then even if you tell them, they didn't know there was such a concept. What do we know and how do we know it? How do we know how do we know that we know? See? Okay. The next word is entity. Now, if you're an exorcist, then an entity is a ghost. But in philosophy, or in more sophisticated talk, where we're not talking about ghosts, we just mean anything is an entity. But an entity doesn't have to be like a physical object, like a rock. A rock is an entity, but so is freedom, okay? Anything is an entity. It's an entity. When it's some kind of, it exists in some way, and then we agree that it exists, we say it's an entity. All right, the next word is very important, and it's a word, well, nobody knows this word. I had to learn the word. I learned this word because when I used the word I had been using, people didn't know what I meant, so I went and found the most technical word I could so they would just stop arguing with me. So, the word is hypostatize. Now, ignoring what hypostasis is in Catholicism, which is a whole other subject, that's in religion. In philosophy, when we hypostatize something, we conceive of something that is not a physical object like it's a physical object, okay? So we'll take something that's like a concept, and it's an abstract concept, and we'll think it's like a physical thing. So this is very common to hypostatize things. It's a bad thing to do. It's very ignorant. But you take something like evil. Evil is an abstraction. Even if you believe that things are, evil happens and there's evil in the world, that's fine. That's how we describe things that cause suffering and that are callously done. They're evil. But evil is not a stuff like tar or a smoke. Okay, that idea that it's a tangible stuff and you can feel it, well, that's very ignorant. That's hypostatizing, an abstraction, okay? Now, there's another word for hypostatize, and I will use it sometime, and it's a synonym of it, and it's reify. When you reify something, you conceive of something that's not a thing, like it's a real thing. So once again, it's like that. Santa Claus is an invented elf. It's based on something real, but Santa Claus is just an imaginary creature. If we believe that Santa Claus really comes down chimneys, then we reify Santa Claus. Same thing as hypostatize. Sorry, but these are important words that people don't know anymore, and it makes it impossible for me to talk. I didn't know them when I was young. You have to learn things. I had to learn them the hard way. I had to read books that had them and then find dictionaries that had them, which they're not in every dictionary. Okay, the next word we need to know is idealism. It's a school of philosophy. It's actually there's a couple of schools of philosophy that fall under the term idealism. And idealism is the opposite of materialism. Materialism is that things that are most real are physical things, like atoms and this composition book. This is real. Whereas something like, love, which is not a physical thing, is not as real as this composition book, okay? That's materialism, where everything is reducible to physical things. When we talk about love, we mean, when people act a certain way, we call that love. But it's really reducible to physical people doing physical things like having sex and kissing and things. All right. But idealism is the opposite. It is the belief that, well, there are two beliefs that fall under the rubric of idealism. One is that ideas are more real than the physical examples. So cupness is more real than individual cups. And cupness is like somehow it is a real existent thing. This is an idea that a philosopher named Plato had. And he is the first idealist. so the word idealism in that case comes from the word ideas. It kind of means ideaism, okay? So ideas are real. So now, the other sense of the word idealism comes from another part of its root, which is ideal. So it's also related to Plato. Plato believed that there were lots of horses, but in a world that he described mythically, there was an ideal horse, okay? And all regular horses, they share in the form of the ideal horse. Now, that's a very, very strange idea, but anyway, and I'm just telling you, that's where the word comes from. That's why it's what its root is. Now, but another way to put it, where it's more common, is that, and the way that is all interpreted, is that for the materialist, things that are most real are physical things. And for an idealist, what is most real is mental, the mind, things. So while there are, bricks, they're really somehow produced by our minds. Okay, so that's where the idea comes from in idealism too. Ideas are in the mind. So what is basic is ideas. Okay, or ideal ideas. Now the next word, some of these words we don't need to learn right now. We'll come back. There's something that I'm surprised people don't know this word. It's an anachronism. Okay? So there are these people. An anachronism is something that's out of place, usually out of its correct time period. So if you came into Julius Caesar's office and you saw a Macintosh on his desk, that would be an anachronism. Okay? It's impossible. It's okay. Well, there are also anachronistic societies that get together and they perform battles from the Civil War, and they dress up in Civil War uniforms, and they are doing anachronisms, they're called. Okay, so that's what an anachronism is. We need to know that word in this book. The word metaphysics. In the 20th century, the word metaphysics came to mean all kinds of things, and came to be associated with New Age superstitions. Okay, so, you go into a New Age bookstore and everything there that's metaphysical, and it's called a metaphysical bookstore when you got books that are about crystals and Atlantis and things like that. I mean, sort of the weird and the spooky, but its original meaning doesn't mean that, and we need to know what it means so we're not totally stupid. Okay. Well, the subject of metaphysics is an actual branch of philosophy, and it didn't used to mean New Age stuff. Obviously, it came to mean that after there was New Age stuff. Originally, metaphysics referred to the subject of what is most fundamentally real. Okay? So, the subject of whether the world is made of matter most fundamentally, like the materialist supposes, or it's ideas and somehow it's generated from our thoughts. Wow. These are metaphysical notions and theories and considerations, okay? Because they're dealing with the subject of what is most fundamentally real. Okay? As my professor, who had his degree, PhD from Stanford, said, metaphysics means What really is real? I love that. It's really great. Now, I have a term that I use in this book that I coined. It's just, it's two words together. It's a coinage of a little, what do you call that? You put two words together. This is we all know what a cause is. Like I said, I talked about the cause of the house burning down. You know, did somebody leave some creosote-soaked rags, or did somebody, you know, drop a match or light a cigarette in bed or something? You know, those are causes. But there's another type of way people think of causes, and it's what I call the nominal cause. The nominal cause. Now, nominal means in name only. Okay, nominal. The name. Okay, nominal can mean other things in the dictionary, but in this case, we're talking about the name, the nominal cause. Now, when there is a nominal cause, when somebody's giving the nominal cause of something, they're not explaining how it causes it. It's just the name of it. So, let's say that we come in and there's a guy and he's dead on the floor. And then you say, well, the butler did it. So the butler is the cause. But unless you know how it was that he did this, and you have more explanation than that, it's just a nominal cause. It's the name of what you think is the cause. And what we're going to find out is sometimes people have very funny names for what they think is the cause, but they don't have any actual explanation for how it caused it. And we'll get to that in the book. It becomes interesting to me. Will be interesting to others in the future. Now, there is a very important word that I have resurrected from the 18th century, from its use in the 18th century and some in the 19th century. But in modern times, much like metaphysical, it kind of doesn't mean the same thing anymore. And like metaphysical, it's sort of associated with things that go bump in the night. And it's the word occult. Okay? Now today, in modern times, we almost exclusively refer to the occult as things that are kind of spooky, like ghosts and things you can't see and stuff, you know. Things that are like paranormal, okay, or supernatural, or magical, or mysterious. They're the occult, okay? That's not what we mean here, and I'm going to use the word a lot because there are modern versions of it will not work for me. They cause confusion and thinking that is not what I mean. The original meaning of the word occult was hidden. Okay, so it's not perceived. You can't see it, smell it, taste it. You got it, and you can't even picture it because it's not that kind of thing. So something that is occult is hidden, and the word comes from the root that meant hidden. Okay. And that's what we mean. Hidden or concealed comes from the Latin word occultus. Hidden from all our faculties. So you can't even conceive of something that's occult. If, you know, because if you're picturing it, then I guess with some kind of eyes, you can see it, and then it's not occult. Like a ghost, ostensibly, a ghost can be seen by, you know, a psychic, maybe children, maybe animals can see a ghost, or other ghosts. So it's not occult. It's not really hidden. What we mean is it's not, it cannot be perceived by any faculty at all. Completely hidden from the mind and the five senses. So it's more like conceptual. Okay. It'll become clear later. To give you a good example, because there is gravity. Now we see things move because of gravity, but gravity is occult. You can't, get a picture of the gravity itself in your mind, okay? You see the effect. You know gravity by its effects. You don't see gravity come in the room. You don't look out through your telescope at planets and go, oh wow, look at that gravity. No, you don't. You see the stars moving, and they're moving because of gravity. Now, the next word is perception. This is important. Again, I'm using its archaic meaning, its original meaning as it appeared in the English language. Today, it means something else. Anytime, any dictionary you go, the first meaning of the word perception means eyesight. Right? It is not what it originally meant. Originally, it meant to take experience of something no matter how you do it. And it could even be an idea that you took experience of through your mind. Like when I see what you mean by freedom, okay, I perceive what you mean, okay? I don't see an object that's called freedom, or an F and an R and an E and an E. That's not what we mean. That's eyesight. We're using it in its original sense. Now I want to explain why the word perception originally had this general use of acquiring knowledge through any of the senses, but also through the mind, okay? The word originally meant to gather or collect. So we perceived, a tax collector went around perceiving taxes. Or a farmer is, collecting potatoes, he's perceiving the potatoes. He's gathering, collecting them, okay? So the word got by extension used to mean gathering or collecting knowledge through either our senses or thinking about it, okay? We perceived it. And we still use the word perceive this way, but we don't notice it. And we go to the dictionary, it contradicts this. But this is its original meaning, and that's how I am using the word, okay? Describes the act of acquiring knowledge through the mind or the senses, okay? That is perceiving. Now, the reason that I call it perceiving is there is no other word. It's a very interesting, it's a long side thing I could go into, which I won't, because they did away with the word in its broad sense, and they didn't replace it, and they created tremendous philosophical confusion because of that, because they can't even talk about perceiving. But I can. Now, there's a word related to perceiving, which is called the percept, and it is a noun, a percept. A percept is anything that is experienced, okay? Anything that you take experience of, the object of your experience. So that object of that experience or that perceiving could be an idea. Just like I said, you can perceive the meaning of the word freedom. Then freedom, in this language, in these use of archaic terms, is the percept that I perceive, okay? So it doesn't have to be, a physical thing. I can also perceive, what the number 2 means, but there's not like a physical 2 somewhere, okay? So, percept. Now, there's a very important word which we're going to talk about more deeper into on this whole subject, and it's called a perceptual schema. Now, a schema is an organization, okay? So I could take the pages of this book and I could tear them out and I could put them in a new order, and I would be schematizing them. I would be putting them into a schema, okay? Now, without realizing it, when we look at things, we schematize what we see. And I call that act, that act. The application of a perceptual schema, an organization. So I can look around this room and I can see a bunch of, there are chairs out there, and I could just see, oh, well, there's so much metal and there's so much, vinyl, that's a way of organizing what's out there. Another way is that there are seats, that there's, a dozen seats. Or I could schematize it, if it was talking about the metal and the vinyl, I could say, well, there's, 100 pounds of, pot metal. And there's so many rolls, yards of vinyl, so many screws. That would be an organization. They're both describing the same thing, those things out there, but they're organizing in a different way. They're seeing something else in it. Okay? That is a perceptual schema. One person could be looking at the metal, thinking about it. Another person is looking at the seats, wondering how many people the room can hold. I have to leave. I have time. Okay. Now, I have to say something else about a schema, okay? Because I've learned that, well, people are not very literate, and that's okay. I wasn't when I was young, and I'm still, there's lots I don't know. But schema is a singular for an organization. Many organizations, ways of organizing something, are called schemata, okay? But in my book, I actually say schema and schemas because people have such a hard time on knowing. There are other words like the plural of phenomenon is phenomena. The plural of a schema is schemata. So sometimes plurals are kind of funny like that, Hippopotamus, hippopotami. I think that's right. They might not be. That's not my area. I'm not a zoologist. So now I just mentioned phenomenon. A phenomenon, the singular being phenomenon, the plural, several phenomena. People use these interchangeably. Also, they use them anyway. Get off on that, but it's important. A lot of people think that a phenomenon is something strange that happens, okay? So it's kind of like something paranormal or something weird or something we don't understand. That's a modern use of the word phenomenon. That's the colloquial use of the word phenomenon. That's, but its original meaning means anything that you perceive. It's a phenomenon. Okay? Just so you know, I'm going to speak that way. That which is phenomenal, okay, meaning it's composed of phenomena, is the opposite of occult. Okay? Remember that occult, something that's occult, cannot be perceived or even conceived, okay? It's occult, totally hidden, mysterious. The opposite of that is a phenomenon, which is something that is perceived, which is funny because today the word phenomenon is used kind of the opposite, like, cattle mutilations. But I don't mean that, where we don't, know the cause. I don't mean that. I just mean anything that is perceived as phenomenal. It is a phenomenon. Okay. I'm sure this is boring the hell out of people. But there's that one genius that's listening. I was like that. I learned these. I a whole lot more. Just gotta do these for my book. So anyway, again, that's an archaic use, you could say. A lot. like the word perception is archaic, occult is archaic, and phenomenon, we're using it in the archaic. Now, when we just talk of something that is sensual, okay, we mean we can experience it through our senses, which are five, through our five senses. That is sensual. Now, I don't need to teach that right now. There's a lot of words here. We'll skip. Okay. And okay, this one more. In older times, there was a phrase which I am going to use because there is no equivalent, I don't think. And that is when we refer to something, I talked about that's sensual, we mean its traditional senses relating to the senses rather than the intellect. It's sensual. Well, the same is true of the word sensible. Okay. Now, today, most times when we say something is sensible, we mean it's reasonable. But in the 1700s, it would have meant, again, like sensual. It was sensible. It could be sensed by way of the senses. So phenomena is sensible. Okay. Now, I'm going to introduce one last phrase, conjunction, and that is sensible qualities. Now, you should be able to just see what it means, but it helps to be told. Sensible qualities, a term that was used in the 18th century, and is more rare today, but it still means the same thing, are qualities that we sense with our five senses. So, a smell is a sensible quality. It's when we say quality here, we mean like a characteristic or a attribute. Okay, so a sensible attribute of something. So the chairs out in the room, they're beige. Well, that beigeness is a sensible quality. Okay, it's not a physical thing. It's like the physical things like the atoms come together in your eyes work a certain way, and it ends up, and the result is the experience of that beigeness. But the beigeness, when we're talking about the beigeness, it is a sensible quality, a quality of our experience. Okay? Okay. Now there are many other sensible qualities. Taste, a fragrance, a sound, a pitch, a note, a chord. These are all sensible qualities of our experience. They're the attributes of our experience. Okay, so I've introduced that. All right. That's enough for today. Tomorrow, or next time I talk, we'll talk about the history of this idea and how it came to me and what we're going to be talking about. All right, thank you very much. This is the end of part 1. 52 minutes. See you next time.